There's a moment when someone questions your worth. Maybe it's subtle, a look, a sentence, a raised eyebrow. Or maybe it's loud, a public jab that leaves you frozen for half a second, and in that second, you feel the fire in your chest. The need to explain, to prove, to make it right. But here's the truth you've never been told. The moment you defend yourself, you hand them your leash, because defending is not about truth, it's about control. And when you justify, you've already admitted their opinion matters more than your certainty. You weren't looking for clarity, you were begging for acceptance. And nothing is more predictable or more powerless than a man trying to be understood by people who want to see him break. Think back, every time you explained, pleaded, over-explained, did it make them respect you, or did it only make them hungrier? They didn't want the truth, they wanted your reaction, and when you gave it to them, you lost the only thing that keeps you above the noise, mystery. This isn't about being emotionless, it's about becoming unreadable, still unshakable. Because the man who says nothing makes everyone else talk. You were taught to explain yourself, to fix misunderstandings, to clear your name, and it felt noble, didn't it? You thought, if I just explain it right, if I speak calmly enough, they'll see who I really am. But they didn't, they never do, because defending yourself is not about being right, it's about being desperate. The second you say, that's not what I meant, you've already conceded the battlefield, not just because you spoke, but because you accepted their framing. You gave them the microphone and said, please, let me prove I'm not guilty. And in that moment, your hands are tied, your power slips, because no one respects someone who asks for permission to exist. They don't hear your logic, they sense your fear, and fear smells like weakness, especially in public. Vernon Cade knew this. When diplomats accused him of arrogance during a televised summit, he didn't flinch, he didn't lean forward. He didn't explain his tone, his strategy, his decisions. He didn't even blink. He leaned back, silence, for 17 seconds. Long enough for the room to shift, long enough for his accuser to look unsure, then repeat himself, then stumble over his own words. 17 seconds of silence turned an accusation into a self-exposure. That's how it works. You don't win by defending, you win by denying the need to defend. Because when you speak first, you anchor the conversation in their values. When you speak last, if at all, you force them to question their own. That's why Vernon once said, every defense is a silent confession dressed in logic. The people who defend themselves believe they're clarifying. They believe it shows transparency, but all it shows is compliance. You're not clarifying. You're trying to get back in their good graces, and grace isn't given to the desperate. It's thrown to the silent, the composed, the man who can sit in the storm and still breathe slowly. You don't need to explain why you're not arrogant. You need to let them sit with the discomfort of not knowing, because that space, the not knowing, that's where your aura builds. That's where your unpredictability grows teeth. Every time you speak to clean yourself, you strip away your edge. You soften the blade, you make yourself digestible, and the world doesn't respect what it can easily consume. It respects what it can't predict, what it can't explain. The less you say, the more they wonder. The more they wonder, the more they fill in the blanks, and the more they fill in the blanks, the more powerful you become, not because you said something brilliant, but because you dared not to. Power doesn't belong to the loudest voice in the room. It belongs to the one who sets the frame, and most people don't even know what that means. They think power is in facts, in evidence, in arguments you can win, but Vernon Cade understood the deeper law. It's not about what's true. It's about what feels true, and feelings follow framing. The frame is the invisible lens everyone looks through. Who's the aggressor? Who's the victim? Who's the calm center of the storm? The frame answers before the facts ever arrive. When someone accuses you, they're not just throwing words at you, they're handing you a stage. And the moment you walk on it, the moment you respond, you agree that this is the story, their story. They say you're difficult. You say, I'm just being honest, and now you've accepted their frame. They say you're arrogant. You say, no, I'm just confident, and now you're dancing to their music. Even if you're right, you're wrong, because they wrote the script. And you're just reading lines. Cade never played that game. He didn't fight frames, he replaced them. In a negotiation with a major oil state, the opposing diplomat opened with an aggressive jab. Mr. Cade, your country's record on integrity is inconsistent. Cade didn't blink, didn't raise his voice, didn't list policies or statistics. He simply said, "It's a good thing consistency isn't what wins wars, isn't it?" The room shifted. Because now the frame wasn't about moral standing, it was about strategic survival, and Cade had just moved the entire conversation into his territory. That's framing. You don't react to what they say, you rewrite what matters. Because whoever defines the terms defines the truth, and truth, in power dynamics, is never pure. It's a weapon. You either wield it, or you get pierced by someone else's version of it. This is why silence is so lethal. Not because it hides the truth, but because it refuses to acknowledge someone else's, and in that refusal, you become the writer of the script. Let them ask questions, let them provoke, let them throw labels. Each time they do, and you don't flinch. You're holding the frame, and the longer you hold it, the more they bend, not because you force them to, but because people are addicted to filling silence with validation. When you stay silent, they start doubting their own story. And the one who controls the story controls the room. They don't attack you to get answers. They attack to pull you down. Sometimes it's sharp, sometimes it's wrapped in a joke, but it's always a move, a silent dare. A bait to make you break character, and you feel it, that tension in your chest, that fire in your face, the need to say something back, to win the moment. But the moment you respond, you confirm their power, because jabs only work if you flinch. Insults only land if you try to wipe them off. The goal is never to win the argument. The goal is to pull you off your throne. At a private dinner in Manhattan, Vernon Cade sat among investors, diplomats, and media sharks. Wine, wit, and quiet war under chandeliers. Then it came, a smile from across the table. An older man with slick hands and soft threats. He leaned in. "Cade, you always keep so quiet. Makes people wonder if you've got something to hide." The table paused. A few subtle chuckles. Eyes shifted toward Vernon. He didn't sip, didn't blink. He just looked at the man, calm, flat, unreadable, then said one sentence. "Wondering is louder than confessing, don't you think?" And that was it. No laugh, no smirk, just silence after the silence. The older man looked down, shifted in his chair. The room moved on, but not without knowing who still held the room. See, what they want is your reaction. They want the flicker in your eye, the breath you hold, the moment you stop being the storm and become the leaf. But you're not here to be relatable. You're here to be untouchable. You never respond to shade. You outlast it. You let their insult float, then vanish on its own. Because when no one joins their dance, they look like the one desperate to be seen. Let them joke. Let them poke. Let them try. You don't move. Because when you don't move, they start shaking. And when you don't speak, the only sound left is the echo of their own insecurity. Let them sit in it. Let them explain their joke. Let them search the room for validation and find none. Your presence doesn't need to retaliate. It needs to remind. Remind them that confidence doesn't raise its voice. It lowers the temperature. And when they look around and realize they're the only one sweating, they'll know you were never under attack. They were, by their own need to be seen. They say you should speak your truth, that if people just understood you, they'd respect you. But that's the lie. People don't want to understand you. They want to predict you. And the moment you become predictable, you become manageable. Most men spend their lives trying to be understood. They chase clarity like it's safety. They explain their choices. They unpack their past. They open every wound, hoping someone will say, "I get it now." But what they hear instead is silence. Not the good kind. The kind that means you talked too much, you lost your edge. Vernon Cade learned this the hard way in his early career. During a media scandal, he sat down for an interview. They accused him of double-dealing, betrayal, backed, or politics. He explained everything, every policy, every email, every step. And when it aired, they cut his words in half, twisted his tone, used his openness as a weapon. The headlines didn't say. Cade clarifies. They said. Cade scrambles to defend his legacy. That day he learned something brutal. The more you explain, the more you confirm the narrative isn't yours anymore. And the irony, explaining doesn't build trust, it exposes need. Need to be seen, need to be liked, need to be understood. But power doesn't come from being understood. It comes from being untranslated. When they don't know what you're thinking, they watch you closer, they fill in the blanks. And most of the time, they assume more strength than you actually showed. That's the trick. You don't need to say anything brilliant. You just need to hold your silence long enough for their mind to invent something better than the truth. And if they ask again, if they say, "But what did you mean by that?" you say, "If you heard it, it's yours." Because clarity is for comfort, and comfort is for the crowd. You're not here for comfort, you're here for control. You don't want them to get you, you want them to respect you, and respect doesn't grow in transparency. It grows in shadow. The unknown creates tension, tension creates focus, and focus creates power. So stop chasing understanding. Let them misunderstand, let them assume wrong, let them gossip, question, invent, while you remain still. Distant, unreadable, not because you're hiding, but because you've outgrown the need to explain. They speak, they accuse, they point. And you say nothing. Now watch. Watch the silence stretch. Watch their voice rise half a tone. Watch their explanation get longer. Watch their words go from sharp to shaky, because silence, when held with calm, doesn't feel empty. It feels like a mirror, and most people aren't ready to look at themselves. You didn't fight. You didn't deny, you didn't flinch, and somehow, that rattles them more than 100 comebacks ever could. Vernon Cade used to call it the echo effect. The tactic of letting their words echo back onto themselves, letting them sit in the vacuum they created. It breaks people, not because you did something cruel, but because you did nothing at all. We are wired to crave resolution. When we speak, we want response. When we accuse, we want resistance. But when we get stillness, we spiral. In one of Cade's final international summits, a delegate from a hostile country accused him of sabotaging talks behind closed doors. On live feed to the world, Cade turned his head slowly, met his eyes, and said absolutely nothing. The moderator paused, expecting a reply. The room waited. The accuser blinked, then stammered, then clarified, then looked down at his notes. The story the next day. Cade's silence leaves rival exposed. Because when you don't answer, they start filling the space. They add context, they repeat themselves, they try too hard, and the more they speak, the more they look unsure, unstable. Emotional. You didn't say a word, but now they're the one on trial, and the audience. They're not just listening, they're observing. Who's rattled, who's calm, who's leaning forward, who's still. In any social game, that's the real scoreboard. And here's what matters most. When you let someone talk too much, they reveal what they're hiding, what they fear, what they need you to believe. Let them run, let them build their own maze, and when they turn around looking for you, they'll realize they've been performing for a man who never even stood up. This is how you flip the pressure. Not with force, not with volume, with patience, with silence, with presence, because nothing disrupts a storm. Like a man who doesn't move in the wind, they call you arrogant. You don't deny it. You don't defend it. You smile, just enough to sting, and say, "Strange how confidence makes people uncomfortable." And just like that, the blade turns. See, they came to accuse, they came to trap you in their emotional net, but you didn't fight the net. You wrapped it around their own insecurities. This is the power of inversion. You don't just block the insult, you reflect it back, sharper, colder, cleaner. Someone says, "You're manipulative." You say, "Only people who can't influence others say that." They say, "You're fake." You say, "Everyone says that when I stop giving them what they want." These aren't comebacks. They're psychological reversals, because now they're not standing in power, now they're explaining, now they're scrambling. Now they're exposed. Vernon Cade used this like a scalpel. At a press roundtable, a journalist said, People are saying you always control the narrative. Cade didn't blink. He answered, the stories without control are chaos. I prefer clarity. The journalist froze. He didn't expect agreement. He expected guilt, and that's the game. People attack, expecting resistance. When they don't get it, they lose momentum. When you embrace the accusation and flip it, you leave them holding the sword by the blade. They bleed their own energy. This isn't about being clever. It's about staying emotionally clean, detached, composed. You don't need to match their heat. You control the temperature. And when they boil, you stay cold. Let them ask, let them poke, let them dig. Every time you reply without defense, every time you answer with surgical detachment, you rise, because now they're on trial. Now they're the one who looks reactive, unsure, unbalanced. And you're not arguing, you're not pleading, you're reframing and framing. Always wins over fighting. Remember this, the man who flips the accusation into insight controls the room. Not because he's right, but because he's untouched. Sometimes silence isn't enough. Sometimes you vanish, no reply, no post, no message, no presence. You don't block them, you don't mute them. You let your absence ring louder than your voice ever could. This is disappearance, not out of weakness, but design. Vernon Cade understood this perfectly. After a brutal smear campaign, articles, interviews, accusations, he didn't defend. He didn't hold a press conference. He didn't tweet a single word. He disappeared for 6 weeks. No contact, no explanation, no response. And while he said nothing, the world spoke for him. The media started to repeat themselves. His enemies posted more and more, hoping he'd react. And the more they posted, the more unstable they looked. Because silence is power, but absence is psychological warfare. When someone insults you, they want a spark. They want to see if they landed a hit. They want you to flinch, shout, reply. But when you don't even show up, you tell them they're not worth reaching, and that breaks them. Because most people survive on emotional response. Even negative attention keeps them alive. But when they throw a punch and you're not even there, they punch air, and air never bleeds. They start spinning. They imagine what you might say. They talk to others about you. They post again. They twist the knife. But there's no wound. Only silence. And that silence becomes a mirror, a haunting one. It reflects their obsession, their noise, their instability, all while you remain still. Absent above it. This isn't ghosting. This is strategy. A silence so loud it drowns their ego. Because when people are ignored, they don't just feel invisible, they feel irrelevant. And irrelevance, for an attacker, is the deepest cut. So the next time they come for you, don't fight, don't post, don't text, just vanish. And let them collapse into the echo they created. There's a point where silence isn't just strategy, it becomes presence. You walk into a room, and before you speak, everything slows down. People shift, postures straighten, voices lower, not because you demanded anything, but because your aura walked in before you did. This is the final form of control. When you no longer need to say anything, because the space already bends to your stillness. Vernon Cade mastered this. In the final years of his career, he spoke less than ever, but when he did, every sentence carried the weight of someone who could say so much more, but chose not to. He once entered a closed-door meeting where tensions between two rival CEOs were burning, both men ready to posture, to battle, to prove their point. Cade sat down, didn't speak for 10 minutes, just listened, and somehow, within those 10 minutes, both men adjusted their tone. They lowered their voices, they became more careful, not because of what Cade said, but because of what he might say. Aura is built in absence, not emptiness, but restraint. When people can't predict you, they prepare for you. They plan their words more carefully. They second-guess their own. You didn't threaten. You didn't warn. You didn't even move. And yet, you controlled the room. This is what happens when your silence earns a reputation. When people stop seeing you as a participant and start seeing you as a force, and that's the shift, you're no longer part of the debate. You are the atmosphere it happens in. The man with aura doesn't fight for respect. He creates it by existing differently. Still, measured, unbothered, not fake calm, but earned composure, the kind that comes from years of not chasing approval. You don't win this by performance, you win it by subtraction, subtracting the noise, the need to reply, the craving to be liked, until all that's left is focus. And when people feel that focus, that deep, still current behind your eyes, they stop talking, not because they're afraid of you, but because they're unsure what you're capable of. And in that uncertainty, you gain control, not of them, but of the environment they now hesitate to disrupt. That's aura. And you don't announce it, you walk in, and let the silence speak for you. This is the final move. You don't attack, you don't defend, you let them destroy themselves trying to reach you. The strongest position isn't standing tall. It's standing still, so still, they exhaust themselves imagining what you might do next. Vernon Cade once said, "The most dangerous man isn't the one who speaks last, it's the one who never needed to speak at all, because by then his presence had already rewritten the room." See, the predictable man argues, he explains, he posts clarifications, he sends long texts, he wants to be seen as good, but the misunderstood man, he doesn't explain, he doesn't chase perception. He knows power doesn't live in being understood, it lives in being unreadable, because when people can't decode you, they start building stories, and fear lives in stories. There was a time when Cade was called out publicly, video exposés, online hate, endless attempts to bait a reaction. He didn't speak, and slowly, something strange happened. The people accusing him started looking obsessed, their tone got sharper, their messages longer, their language more emotional, and Cade, he stayed where he always did, above it, silent, immovable, and because he said nothing, the crowd began to shift. They asked, "Why are you still attacking him? He hasn't responded, you're making this personal." One by one, his enemies looked less like truth tellers and more like fanatics yelling at a statue. That's the paradox. When you defend yourself, you stand alone, but when you remain calm, others begin to step forward, not because you ask them to, but because silence demands protection. They defend you, they speak on your behalf, they redirect the fire. And you don't even have to move. That's narrative dominance, not built in noise, but in tension, because here's the truth. You don't need a clean reputation, you need a strong one. Good reputations are soft, they're easy to stain. They crumble under gossip, but strong reputations, they're made of stone. People don't always like you, they may not even trust you, but they never take you lightly. That's what happens when you stop defending. You stop chasing image and start creating gravity. The world orbits around those who refuse to be pulled, so from this point forward, you don't explain. You don't overreact, you don't clarify, you define your image, your tone, your rhythm. You don't fight the story, you become the one no one dares to miswrite, because the man who never defends doesn't need to, he already won.